Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary with a knife video. And today I have the Spyderco Pacific Salt. Now this is a knife I've been kind of looking for a while. And before that, I knew I wanted a Spyderco with H1 steel and a spider edge. Okay, I thought about a number of different ones. I thought about a Dragonfly and a Rescue and even a couple fixed blades. Eventually I settled on the Pacific Salt as the one I just seemed to appeal to me the most. And there are a number of out there and you know, there's Spydercos and they're H1 and I'm sure they're going to be okay for most people. This is the one out of all of those that I preferred the most. And I was really up in the air about the yellow or black. And once I put this knife on my list, the way I always do it, I decide I'm looking at decide I'm interested in a knife, I put it on the list, and then I wait to see it for a good price. And so the black DLC was the one that that came up at the best price sort of recently. Okay, now that's how I ended up with this particular knife. Let me tell you a little bit of introduction. The Pacific Salt series, or I mean the Salt series of Spydercos, are knives designed for water. Okay, they can get wet, they can even be around salt water, and they're not going to rust. So that's the primary benefit of these knives, and they offer them in a number of different sizes. You know, there's one that's similar to a Delica, there's the Dragonfly, there's this one that's similar, of course, to an Endura, and there are others as well. So that's sort of the reason for the H1 steel for the Salt series of knives. And the Spider Edge, everything that I've been able to read or know about indicates that the Spider Edge is a little harder. So when you go with the H1 steel, it's a work hardened steel, and the grinding involved in putting the Spider Edge on it gives you a higher Rockwell hardness at the edge than just the plain edge. Okay, so that was another feature, or that was another sort of background piece of information. Lastly, I like the Spider Edge, and I had the native with a Spider Edge, and I really liked it. So when it went, it was just a little too small for me, so I got rid of it. But I had nothing, so I knew I kind of wanted something with a full Spider Edge on it, and so this also kind of fits that category as well. So those are all the things that kind of went behind me getting a hold of this knife. And you know, the reason I say that is because you may be interested in this as well, and that's some of the things that you may want to think through. There are other models. If you need a knife specifically that's for water, hey, that's great. I would say this would also work well as a rescue knife, and I'll speak to that later on. This may go permanently into my bunker gear. So let's keep going here with size and weight, which is normally what we talk about next. So the size and weight on this, you guys know I like big knives. This is 8 3/4 inches overall, which right in my wheelhouse. I really like those larger blades, and so this is very appealing along those lines. The blade's length on this is basically 3 3/4 inches. It's a little over 3 3/4 inches, and the handle on this is basically 5 inches. It's just a little under 5 inches, 4 7/8. And so overall, you get 8 3/4 inches in total. Where this knife really shines, of course, I love, you know, a long blade like that, and so that's definitely a plus for me, one in the win column. But this knife only weighs 2.9 ounces. Okay, really impressive on the weight, and you're getting a knife that is quite big. You know, rare are you. Let me take a breath here so I can use full words when I'm speaking. So yeah, it's rare to find a knife that is that lightweight, under 3 ounces, and over 8 inches. Okay, there are knives that are under 7 inches that weigh more than that. All right, so very good on the size and weight with this knife. Okay, let's go ahead and get into some comparisons. That's always the next thing we do after size and weight. And I have a few good comparisons here. Although, let me say this. There are not a lot of comparisons out there that fit this specific niche, and that is a knife that can be in and around water and have no issues. Okay, there are other, you know, you can Google it. There are other knives that are designed to be that way. Dive knives that you'd usually pay quite a bit for if you went to a professional dive shop. If, by the way, you're thinking of using this for diving, let me say probably go with a fixed blade. Okay, Even for, let's say, for water rescue with the fire department, we have a fixed blade that kind of clips to our shoulder here, and hopefully you don't need it, but for entanglements and things like that, you do have that available. Now, that said, I think the Spyder Edge is good for that option. If you're looking for a dive knife, if you're looking for a sort of a rescue knife, the Spyder Edge I think is a good option for that. Now, let me come back to what I was really trying to say. I said all that because these comparisons are not comparisons in terms of a water knife. Okay, I don't have a lot of water knives. I'm not a diver or anything like that. But I do have an Endura here. This is, of course, the titanium Damascus Endura. I just want you, when you see this, pretend this is the, you know, the gray FRN Endura. It's the same size and everything. It's just, it weighs more because it's titanium instead of FRN. But you can see that these are very, very comparable knives. All right, very comparable in terms of size. In terms of weight, they're quite different, but the normal Endura is a little closer in weight to the Pacific Salt, although it is heavier. All right, so if weight is a major consideration, that may be a good reason to go with the Pacific Salt, even if maybe you're not going to be in and around water all the time. Moving on to a couple others, just for information purposes, it's always helpful to bring out the Para 2 for comparisons, just because so many people are familiar with the Paramilitary 2. You can see that it is smaller. It is a little heavier as well. Now, again, the Para 2 is one that really excels in terms of a lightweight knife that gives you a lot of usefulness in that very lightweight package. All right. Now, in terms of knives that are close in weight, the Sog Aegis, okay, and the Aegis is a knife that I love the design on this knife, but I hate the lock, okay. It does have a very little bit of blade play, and I've never seen an Aegis that didn't have a little bit of blade play, and that's kind of annoying, but it does compare well in terms of weight and ease of carry to the Salt. Now, in terms of ergonomics, really 6 of one, half dozen the other. Both of these are very comfortable knives. The Aegis, I think, is probably a little cheaper, okay? So if all you're looking for is a knife to carry that's really, really light, that maybe you could carry while you're running, or, you know, doing some other thing that places extreme weight restrictions on you, this may be an option for that. All right, obviously the corrosion resistance is not going to be there. One other SOG, and that is the Trident Elite. Again, the corrosion resistance is not there, but very similar in size, and a fairly lightweight knife for its size as well. Okay, so those are some comparisons for you, and as I say, there are not a lot of comparisons in terms of being good for water as this is, but they are comparable in terms of size, in terms of weight, and maybe they're options that you would want to consider if that's your primary consideration. Now, if you're looking at specifically a knife to use around water, you know, you're in a whole different ballpark, and I don't have a whole bunch of those knives to show you. All right, so moving on to the blade, let's zoom in a little bit, and I'll be able to talk about this blade, which I think is really, really cool. There we go. Actually, it looks nicer from this side, so let's show you this side. Okay, so from here you can see that it is H1. You can see the Spyder edge on this, and let me say this, H1 steel is a work-hardened steel. Okay, so that means the process involved in grinding out these serrations actually makes the edge harder, and therefore hold an edge better. Now, in addition, I'll speak to the Spyder edge here. I've had the native with a Spyder edge, and I really, really liked it, okay? Now, let me say this. I prefer all or nothing, okay? I've had a number of knives with partial serrations, and I just don't like partial serrations. Although this is a knife you could probably get away with it because of the length, I still prefer the full Spyder edge. Now, yes, the edge holding is going to be better in H1 steel with a Spyder edge from everything I've been able to read and know about. And let me say that it's a weird thing to try and figure out. You'd almost have to have two knives with a Spyder edge in different steels, because I've used this a bunch, all right? And the thing that makes it difficult is that because of the serrations, it's going to keep cutting and keep cutting fairly well, even if it gets kind of dull. Okay, that's one of the benefits of serrations. And think about your kitchen knives at home. You've probably never sharpened a steak knife and that's because of the serrations. They tend to hold their edge pretty well. Now they are only cut on one side, okay, so see that? You can see where a little bit of the DLC is worn from me lightly touching up this edge. And I will say this, most people avoid serrations because they're harder to sharpen, or their perception is that they're harder to sharpen. And let's just say yes and no, okay? There are sharpeners specifically designed for sharpening this, and certainly if you have a sharp maker, you'll have no problem. And I'm not going to go into a huge discussion here, but Google it. There are lots of guys out there who show you how to sharpen the spider edge serrations, or pretty much any other serrations you could think of. There are tons of YouTube videos out there that you can check out. All I'm going to say is, yeah, it's true that, you know, if you're going to try to sharpen on a flat stone, that won't work. But there are lots of rod sharpeners that work just fine with this, including the Spyderco Sharp Maker. Okay, so in terms of, you know, ease of sharpening, it's not really that bad. Certainly not as bad as some people make it out to be. And the other, you know, the other consideration in all of that is that because of the serrations, it's going to continue to cut for a long time past when just a plain edge would be too dull to be of much use. All right, so that's the thing about the full spider edge there, and that explains not only why I went with the full spider edge on this particular knife, but also I did comment a little on the H1 steel. It is a steel that's designed not to rust. It's a little softer, but you can make up for that by going with the spider edge rather than the plain edge. And even in the plain edge, okay, it's not that it's just a terrible steel and it's going to be dull every 2 seconds. Okay, that's not a problem either. So that's the blade. I found this blade, as I say, very, very useful. And in addition to being useful, I gotta say, it's a pretty cool looking blade. I love the H1. I love the way those spider edge serrations look. Okay, great Instagram knife. But also just, it's a good utility knife. If what you're primarily looking for is something that'll do some hard cutting of rope and fabric and cardboard around water, this will perform for you, okay? And that's the main consideration that I have, and probably most of you have as well. Let's talk about lockup and deployment, and you can see here while we're zoomed in, hopefully, that there is a Torx bit on here. There are some models, the newer models all have the ability to be adjusted at the pivot. So this one has no side-to-side blade play, and that's because I did adjust it a little bit. There's no up and down play either, okay? To me, this is kind of important because let's say you bought one that didn't have a Torx bit and it gets loose. What do you, like, you're just stuck living with it. And that's not cool to me. I need to have the ability to adjust that pivot, okay? Maybe you don't, but for me, the Torx bit at the pivot is kind of a critical feature. It is a typical Spyderco lockback. Now, there are no liners in here of any kind, which makes sense because you don't want anything that can rust, all right? Deployment on this is solid, but it's not super fast. I don't know if I can even do it and stay in frame. No, I can't. You can kind of flick this open with a bit of wrist and a bit of, you know, your thumb if you're used to flicking open Spydercos, but it's not as easy as some others. For example, my Endura I could get to deploy pretty quickly. This one, even though I've used it and carried it, it should be broken in. I'm still a little slow getting it open, all right? Now again, this is not designed to be sort of a combat knife, and even in a combat knife, you know, this is pretty fast. You don't necessarily need to be able to flick open a knife unless you're just going to sit on the couch, eat potato chips, and flick your knife open. All right, that's my take on lockup and deployment. I will say this: I'll probably bring this knife back in a video coming up and compare this lockback to a cold steel that I have coming, but. And if you want to guess, I'd love to hear your guesses in the comments below. What cold steel do you suppose is fairly new and highly comparable to the Endura in terms of size and weight and all of that? All right. Comment if you want with your guesses below. Let me say this. I've seen some Endura torture tests and they don't do super well. This is not a knife designed to be batoned through wood or anything like that. It's an EDC knife designed to do your typical cutting tasks through the day. And these serrations will do a good job with most of the cutting tasks. They did a good job with the cutting tasks I encountered. Finally, moving on to the handle. Let's zoom out a little bit. We're getting kind of long, and I know I usually am long in my videos, but I want to kind of move on here because my overview might be a little longer than usual. So, you do have the FRN handle here. It's very, very comfortable. I don't know, like the Endura handle has changed. This is essentially the same handle that was on the older generation Enduras. It's really comfortable, and I'm kind of surprised they went away from it because it is very comfortable. I guess the look of it, they maybe wanted something that looked a little different. The pocket clip is reversible, just a slot screw there that you can switch out and you can put it over on this side. All right, but this is not a knife that you really want to take apart, okay, generally speaking. You could do it if you really, really had to, but it will void your warranty, and it's going to be a little more difficult than some other knives, okay? Let's see, so handle is comfortable. It has no metal anywhere, okay, so that's because you don't want it to rust. But overall, there's not a whole lot of discussion about the handle. The ergonomics are good. The jimping is excellent, which is usually the case from Spyderco, unless it's a Taiwan Spyderco, and then they tend to not be quite as sharp. Okay, but yeah, great handle. You can get a lot of work done with this knife very easily. It does have a lanyard hole, but it's not a big one, so you'd have a really, I don't think you'd ever get 550 cord through there. You'd have to use something else. All right, so overall, this, I think, is a very useful, very good knife. There is this limitation. It is kind of a niche knife, okay? Not all of us are around water. Not all of us are getting our knives wet or working near salt water or even in high humidity environments. And for most people, that means you should probably just go with an Endura, okay? Now, if you have some reason to go with the highly corrosion resistant steel, if you have some reason, maybe a weight restriction, you want those few less ounces, I think this is a great knife, okay? I don't think you'll be disappointed. If you want something that you can maybe take fishing in the boat or take swimming or any of those things where a knife might get wet, again, great option. If you're hiking, okay, every year I go on a hike with the kids at camp and we hike through this river and you know you're gonna get wet. This is a perfect option for that kind of a roll because you can get this wet and not worry a thing about it. All right, so excellent for that option. Again, there are some other Spydercos that have that same roll. And here's where I think this knife is going to end up for me. This will probably go in my bunker gear. I am a volunteer firefighter. This is a knife that I can put in my gear and not have to worry about it. Other things that are in my gear, because it gets wet, because it gets damp, you can't just leave it in the pocket and forget about it. This I can drop in the pocket of my bunker gear. I know I've got a knife with me all the time, and I can forget about it. Okay, if I need it, I know I can access it in my front pocket, and I can make the cuts that I need to make. Generally, those are going to be cuts where serrations are helpful, and so it's a great option for that roll. I would suggest if you're an ambulance tech, if you're a firefighter, maybe especially a firefighter, we tend to work around more water. I think these salt knives are really good, and especially for that kind of a job, I definitely want the larger blade. I want to be able to put this behind a seatbelt and in one rip have the whole seatbelt gone, okay? Or a piece of fire hose if I'm tangled up in it or whatever else, okay? So for that kind of roll, I think this is really helpful. For a lot of other things though, if you're a police officer, yeah, probably go with the Endura or go with something else. If you're, if you don't need that water resistance, this may not be that appealing to you. Now, maybe you're a collector of Spydercos, or maybe you just think it's awesome to have a knife that literally cannot rust. And again, if that's you, hey, I don't think you'll be disappointed. If it's just weight, again, this is a great knife for its weight and size. But there are other knives, and I even showed you some that might work for you. Overall, I really like this knife. I'm really happy to have it in my collection, and I can say it works really well. That's all I've got for you on the Spyderco Pacific Salt. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we will talk to you soon.